Hi, this is Gervase Bush. I am one of the co-founders of the Bushe-Marshak Institute for Dialogic OD and one of the editors of BMI Publishing. And today I'm happy to be here with Dr. Mark McKergow, who has just completed a book for us on hosting generative change. And I want to start by giving you some background on Mark. I know that he started out as a nuclear engineer and has a doctorate in self-organizing systems. And tell us a bit about how you got from there to here, Mark.
So hi, Gervase. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I started off as a nuclear physicist, actually, in a power plant. And I did a PhD in self-organizing systems, and they were hydrogen atoms that organized themselves under very low temperatures when I did that. But the idea of how do things self-organize was very interesting to me. And so I was rising up the management greasy pole at the power plant when they announced it was going to close. And all of a sudden, rather than running a nuclear power plant, we had to invent all sorts of processes for how to shut it down and how to then start to dismantle it, which is a completely new project in an organization, an industry that had been 35 years doing the same thing. So I had this marvelous opportunity to kind of get involved in management of a really uncertain situation, which was fascinating. And they said, oh, you should get some management education. So I went off and did an MBA in my spare time, laughingly call my spare time. And I discovered the creative management and change management and people management and all kinds of interesting stuff. And then the other person who helped me was Margaret Thatcher, our Prime Minister of the time, who decided to privatize the electricity industry in which I was working. And we had to reorganize in business terms, and I got to do jobs like business planning and strategic planning and change management and HR development. And I got a lot of good feedback for my HR, for my facilitation and my HR development, management training, management facilitation, and it seemed I was kind of good at it naturally. And I saw there were other people doing it and making a living at it. Not only that, they were making more money than I was and having more fun than I was. So in 1992, I quit the nuclear industry and set myself up as a consultant. Mm-hmm. And it's been a marvelous time ever since then, working with all sorts of people all over the world and gaining a lot of interesting experience. And one of the nice things about this book is you give me the chance, Gervase, to write down a lot of the kind of unconscious competence gained over 3 decades of running loads and loads and loads of events and workshops, which I've never really done before in this way, and combining that with the metaphor of hosting, which I will talk about in a minute. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that opportunity. It's really good to put some of these practical lessons down on paper so other people can get some.
Well, I'd say the depth of your experience really comes through in the book, Mark, and it's been very useful for me. I'll tell you, I hadn't really gotten that sort of deep into the hosting metaphor before, and I learned a lot of things reading your book that will definitely be impacting the work I do going forward. And I'm wondering what first got you interested in hosting as a metaphor, first for leadership, because I know you've written a book on hosting as leadership, but now also from the point of view of generative change.
So I was at a workshop in 2003, not looking for anything in particular, and the guy running the workshop said, there's an old Arabic proverb, the host is both the first and the last. And I immediately started thinking, well, that's a leader, isn't it? It's the first and the last. The leader goes first, the leader goes last to make sure nobody is left behind like the captain of a sinking ship. And I stopped listening to his workshop and immediately started scribbling notes about hosting and leadership and what happens if you bring those two ideas together. And so that was 2003. I went off to Amazon like any consultant would to try and buy the book about how to be a good host, and discovered there wasn't one. Not really, not a deep examination of what does it mean to be a host. So I decided to write it, started researching and digging around and discovered all sorts of fascinating angles. And it's such a rich idea with so much history and so much international cross-cultural resonance. Every culture does it a bit differently, mind, but there's so much, it's in every culture, it's in every spiritual tradition, this idea of welcoming people. How do you welcome people?
Right, and orchestrating an event to be productive, to be satisfying and successful.
Well, that's what we come to. So the idea of hosting as a leader is about you focus on bringing people together to create better decisions. You don't take the decision, you bring the people together and you all take the decision.
Right.
And that connects with more modern ideas on participative leadership and other things like that. But then you have the idea of hosting conversations as well. And I'm by no means the only person in the world who's interested in hosting conversations.
Right.
But it's interesting to try to connect the big picture of the host role with the nitty-gritty you get when you're trying to bring people together for a dialogic OD event, for a workshop where we're after new thinking. And that requires some skill, some practical skill, as well as some big picture awareness. And that's where this book, I think, is really interesting, and it covers territory that isn't often explored.
I agree.
In this kind
Would you say more about what you think is the difference between hosting and what we conventionally do as facilitators in organization development?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd say it's a blurry boundary. It's not a clean distinction. But I think facilitation, if you like, has moved on from when I started 30 years ago. You walked into a room with a facilitator, and the facilitator would be holding the pen, standing by the flip chart, asking questions,
well, of course.
editing the answers, minute by minute involved in the conversation.
Right.
Whereas now I think we're hosting conversations. You're much more focused on creating an environment where people will work together, and then sort of standing back from that and letting them get on with it and not being so involved. And instead focusing your attention once things are going on the boundaries. Is there somebody who's been left out? Are there people who are not engaged? What can we do about that? Are there topics emerging that we weren't expecting? Are there things that are being left out? Are there things that need to be included? What does this mean for next time? Who else do we need to invite? So you're standing further back, I think, metaphorically, and letting people get on with those conversations. And of course, you're helping them to set it up, and you're nudging the thing along and creating some structure that will hopefully lead at the end of the day or the workshop sessions to something constructive. But it's an interesting and detailed and nudgy kind of art, I think, hosting, in the same way that hosting a dinner or a party is a nudgy kind of art. You can plan it for all you're worth, and you should. So you must be a good planner. But then when people show up, all sorts of unexpected things begin to happen, and you just have to go with that and do the best you can. And I think hosting a big, large-scale dialogic OD event workshop is just like that. There is no way you can plan for everything. But that surely doesn't mean that you don't have to plan. My goodness me. You should be putting a bunch of effort into planning, and then a bunch of effort into your ability to be responsive, flexible, spontaneous, utilize what's going on in the workshop.
Right. Well, that to me was one of the main messages that came from your book, is good hosting is both very detailed planning and the ability to throw the plan out the window at a moment's notice and work with what shows up. And one of the big takeaways for me from the book is it's not just about how to be a host during the event. It's all the things that happen before the event, and really made me much more aware of things I'm not doing and I should be doing. And, you say at one point in the book, you think a good invitation is the single most useful thing that you can do to tilt the scales in favor of a productive event. And I wonder why you think that.
So the invitation is the thing that goes out beforehand to invite people. And you have to do something like that. And in the old days, it would say when and where and be very practical. But actually, the way you word this thing, the way you invite people, the way you say, why is this going to be a really interesting event, worthwhile event? Why do we want you to be there? You personally, ideally. What in advance can you be doing to help us, or to help yourself? What are we going to be doing? Why is this important? Because you're setting everyone's expectations. And what happens then is they show up expecting the event that you're putting on, at which point everyone is fine and we're all off and running. What really creates difficulties, in my experience, is when people show up expecting something that's different to the thing you're planning to put on. And that takes you into a whole bunch of immediate improvisation and worrying and do we, don't we, and what do we do? And the people get antsy and so on. So I think that taking great care, and it's in the book how to do this, how to construct the invitation, what kinds of things to consider, and there's a whole bunch of stuff to go in there. And even an example in the case study in the book of a real invitation that's based very much on the kind of thing I would actually do. When you send that out to people and when you approach people about the workshop, how are you engaging? Because that's what's going to make the difference on the day between them showing up in a very constructive frame of mind and them showing up either defensive or worried or concerned or, you know, aggressive because they think that you ought to be doing something different or whatever. So it's matching that expectation of the people with the thing you're trying to do. That's what the invitation does, and that's what leads to a productive event.
Okay, makes a lot of sense to me. Well, thanks for talking to me, Mark, and I hope those of you watching will go out and buy a copy of Hosting Generative Change, available on any Amazon marketplace. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, James.